Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. Today, we'll be covering fundamentals around, how you can essentially leverage DevOps and tools to be able to deal with this digital transformation. And we're really excited to share some insightful information about this amazing tool that Pulumi has created and how you can use this today. And we also have Kim and their team that is essentially using this to be able to really drive that transformation. So today we'll be covering cloud native applications by unifying your DevOps team. So on this presentation today, you'll be hearing from Trevor Hansen, myself, which is a partner solution architect. I've been with the company for about 3.5 years now. I originally joined working in the premium support, dealing with enterprise companies and really seeing that digital transformation that they were going through from, dealing with these old school monolithic applications, moving towards those, microservices, decoupled applications. And I've seen firsthand how, enabling DevOps teams with the right tooling allows you to rapidly innovate and develop faster than ever before. We also have Luke Hoban, the CTO at Pulumi. I've seen this amazing work that team has been putting together from day one, and I'm really excited to see him share his story and how you can leverage this tool in your company's day-to-day development. It becomes really powerful, and we'll learn from Kim Hamilton, the CTO at Learning Machine. She'll be sharing their story and their journey about how they're using this today and what experiences they've experienced. So as I mentioned, I'm Trevor Hansen. I'm a partner solution architect with Amazon Web Services. And I've obviously, throughout this journey at AWS, I've really taken really liking to the DevOps model, that whole transformation and serverless and integrations. And I'm going to cover just a couple of fundamentals. I could spend hours on this topic on DevOps, but the real idea here is understanding how our partner solutions such as Pulumi can really drive that pace of innovation for you and really, ignite that superpower of developing, being able to serve your customers in a better way. So as organizations start focusing more on technology, they're finding these traditional DevOps models really slow and somewhat burdensome. You're seeing these companies really rapidly innovating, and this becomes very competitive. You essentially want to be empowering your DevOps teams to be able to focusing really on using the right tools to be able to make them develop a lot faster. So they're able to, look at how they're improving their customer experience, how they're iterating on their existing applications and portfolio. You're also seeing this transformation of, previously you would have IT teams that were, building out that infrastructure and dealing with that, and you have your developers that are sort of siloed. And looking at this modern day application development, you're looking in the DevOps model where, now you're starting to using infrastructure as code and those things, which we'll be touching up shortly. And then you have operational teams that need to relay that customer feedback back to the development teams. And this whole process gets sort of baked together in this whole DevOps methodology. And there's a lot of content out there. And as I said, today we'll be really focusing on the tooling. So as you see, DevOps enables this transformation by changing the structure of the development teams to make them more agile and give them both the power and the responsibility of their own products. This really allows those teams to take that ownership and ensure that they're optimizing their components of that application. And by supporting these teams with the right tooling and automation, they can really spend a lot more time on, either working on those bugs or those feature requests or improving the whole operation of that particular components of the application. Instead of development teams having to own a large number of products and essentially, potentially a monolithic application, they really allow them to streamline and focus on a set of objectives. And this is where tooling really allows those teams to be able to move really quickly. And this essentially is just owning that whole life cycle for the team. So actually dealing with that feedback, being able to look at, how do we improve the functionality from a customer experience, but also an internal experience as well. And this is where we're really going to highlight some containers. Microservices has really changed the game from, having to spend months, if not, seeing these DVDs and, media files that had to be sent out to companies and having to, provision those servers, get them up to standard, having your IT teams have to install the dependencies. We're seeing microservices really creating, a level playing field for those developers so that there's a consistent platform for them to be able to work in. It's a controlled environment, and this is something that really changes the idea. It's taking that monolithic application and breaking it up into more loosely coupled APIs And by adopting these microservices, you're able to actually, reduce that blast radius by leveraging things as containers. And this is something that, tooling end to end is really going to determine the success of leveraging containers. That's, understanding the monitoring aspect, ensuring that you've got the right security in there, and also being able to provision those really quickly throughout that whole process of development, testing, and pushing them into production. And this allows you to essentially get those instead of months, you're looking at, potentially a couple of hours of pushing new code into those applications. So just touching on some of those benefits, as I previously mentioned, there's a standard playing field now. You know that the development teams or your teams that are actually looking at improving the code and the functionality of the application, they're able to take that and send them over to, any environment. And that that's going to be the same experience. Everything's defined as a single template of code. And this allows those companies to be able to understand that, wherever they're going to be putting that in that containered environment, it's containered, it's got, you're specifying the dependencies that you're going to be using, and anything outside of that environment is not going to infect that application. So you're essentially making sure that you've got the right resources available for your applications to run at an optimal level. You've got the right tooling monitoring, from a security, and making sure that the monitoring is reporting those things correctly. And you're able to really, break it out from this old school stateful applications to a stateless application. That if that container is removed, new ones replaced. And this is something that we're really seeing companies leveraging today. So just touching briefly on what Amazon provides, our service team spend a lot of time, and they're really passionate about this to ensure that, you're able to leverage, a wide range of container solutions. You're really looking at from, our Elastic Container Service through our, our EKS solution that we've recently launched. You're looking at Fargate, where we've actually done a bit of abstraction there for you as well. And then we've also spent a lot of time with our partner, our partners, to be able to create all the tooling and optimization around this to essentially allow you to create that unified experience. And this is in all these different areas of monitoring, the continuous integration, as well as security. And Pulumi really drives that speed factor of the continuous integration part. And this is something that Luke will be sharing with you guys shortly. So as we had mentioned, companies are looking at moving from this old monolithic application where the blast radius is really, scary. If one component of the application is down, you're looking at potentially a fairly large outage. Where you're moving to these microservices, you're really looking at, having that one container. It's really isolated. You can really control, if anything goes wrong with that, you can really focus on removing any vulnerabilities or issues immediately. You can also allow you to be able to innovate and rapidly push new versions of your code out quite frequently, where it be serving internal microservices or to improve customer experiences. And this is something that we put a lot of content into, but I really want us to focus on, the tooling that we'll be talking about today. So I have briefly mentioned about the monitoring side. Monitoring is becoming even more crucial when you're starting to deal with a lot more resources in any environment. And you really want to understand that whole life cycle of that application, understanding how quickly you're developing something, how something's testing, and how something's in that build test, to make sure that you're not actually, training in a negative way. You really want to make sure that the applications, time periods are improving. You are making sure that there's no issues that are going above any thresholds. And there's a lot of, solutions out there, including AWS provided solutions to improve that overall time and monitoring capabilities. So speaking about, when you start putting in this DevOps strategy and you're putting the right tooling in place, you're empowering these development teams with the right tooling, such as Pulumi, you're looking at how, these are just kind of statistics that we've looked at how fast companies are able to rapidly innovate. And, in a competitive landscape in the software industry that we're seeing today, being able to move faster, continuously improving that customer experience, and allowing your developers to actually feel like they have a superpower. This is something that I absolutely love, and I sit with, companies all day, seeing this transformation and how powerful it is. So this is something that hopefully Kim should be able to share. And then the last is, security is job zero for everyone. Every person at the company is responsible to ensure that those companies are safe. And there is a lot of, power in making sure that these containers are secure in every possible way, from from the ground all the way up. And this is something that, you know, a lot of our partners have put a lot of time and effort into. And these service teams have really put, you know, those functionality and capabilities to understand that security in your application in the cloud, where it be using containers, microservices in your own capacity. And today we're really going to understand, you know, how you can implement things from templatized solutions. So security is something, if you have anything, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. I can point you in the right direction. So I'm going to be handing over to Luke. Luke is, as I mentioned, is the CTO at Pulumi. They've done a fantastic job, and I'm really excited to be working with them. Luke, over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Trevor, and thanks again, everyone, for joining us for the webinar today. My name is Luke Oben. I'm the CTO at Pulumi, and I'm going to spend the next few minutes really talking about how Pulumi can help you take advantage of all the amazing capabilities of the AWS platform that Trevor just talked about, and to unlock all the capability to do the transformation that Trevor was highlighting in his slides there. At Pulumi, we're building tools that enable teams to quickly and easily unlock all the value of AWS, and in the process to bridge the gap between development and DevOps teams as they make that transition. And so one of the things we've seen as we talk to developers using AWS and using the cloud in general is that they love the incredible set of building blocks that AWS provides. And they really want to take advantage of those to transform the way their business is run. But they find it's still too hard to compose those building blocks together into their complete applications. The skills to doing this tend to be very isolated to specific individuals within an organization who have specific skills. And what they're looking for is democratizing access to those capabilities within the organization, really empowering their development teams to take advantage of and build on top of all the building blocks that the cloud is providing them. We find that development teams are often kept at arm's length from that rich value of the cloud platforms because of sort of some of the esoteric formats and complexities of reaching out and using some of those capabilities. And the DevOps teams who do have access to those cloud capabilities are often left without the robust software engineering tools to tame the growing complexity as they bring in more of those features and value into their applications. At Pulumi, we're building an open source SDK and programming model for easily authoring, deploying, and managing that cloud infrastructure using code. Pulumi provides access to everything in AWS, so you can use all those capabilities Trevor mentioned and everything else in the AWS platform, as well as access to Kubernetes and other cloud resources. Pulumi unlocks this capabilities by allowing you to use familiar programming languages to define your infrastructure. So developers and DevOps teams can use JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, and Go, with more languages coming. And using programming languages really unlocks a wide variety of software engineering benefits, things that application development teams have been familiar with the benefits of for the last few decades, really bringing those over into the cloud infrastructure world and enabling the unified DevOps teams to take advantage of those benefits. This is things like rich IDE tooling, which increases the inner loop and speeds up development of new applications. Completion lists and error reporting, testing and linting to verify the quality and compliance of code earlier in the lifecycle instead of after code is already deployed into the wild. Package management and other features to take higher level capabilities, version them and deploy them out in a really robust way. All of these are capabilities that application developers have been using for a long time, and we want to help bring those into the cloud infrastructure space as well. But most importantly, software makes it really easy and natural to build reusable components. And this means you can extract out patterns in your cloud infrastructure and patterns that specialists within your organization are familiar with, and give them simple interfaces and then expose them out just with functions, classes, components, the same sort of things you use within your application development. Expose them out into other members of your team, to other members of your organization, or even to the open source community to take advantage of. On top of this capability to build reusable components, one of the things we're really focused on is building those higher level components to make it an order of magnitude easier to use and combine the benefits of some key cloud infrastructure on top of AWS. That's things like containers, Kubernetes, infrastructure, and serverless. And while there's often other tools that have very specifically vertical solutions for some of these domains, things like Docker Compose for containers, or kube control for Kubernetes, or maybe Terraform for infrastructure, maybe serverless framework for serverless. Each of these provides a high-level experience to make you really productive working inside that particular vertical domain. But most developers aren't constrained to one of these domains. They want to use both containers and managed infrastructure. They want to use serverless and Kubernetes. They want to combine together the benefits of all of these capabilities so that they can really maximize the way that they deliver their applications. And so with Pulumi, we give you a single API that provides access to all of these and provides that same high-level experience that some of these other tools do, but with a consistent model that allows your entire team to work across these technologies. This allows you to do things like adding simple serverless callbacks into your infrastructure. If you have some infrastructure you've defined and you want to take advantage of serverless just to stitch together two capabilities within your infrastructure, that's as easy as just adding a few lines of code. If you want to do Kubernetes, but you want to combine that with managed AWS services, so you get the best of reliable managed AWS services with the nice managed Kubernetes API, that's a really easy thing to do from a single API and a single programming model that your entire team can use. Now, a single programming model and toolchain really helps break down those barriers between development and operations. Developers are empowered to work directly with the cloud infrastructure. They're not constrained to working with just the serverless capabilities. They can access the entire capabilities of the platform. And DevOps teams gain the ability to harness some of the robust software engineering practices around their cloud infrastructure. Things like being able to test the cloud infrastructure, version it, get type checking over it, get quality assurances up front, that sort of thing. So let me take a second in the next example to really dive down and look at some code and kind of give a sense of what it feels like to work with Pulumi. So first, we'll look at a modern serverless architecture using Fargate. Now, Trevor talked about Fargate in the context of one of the solutions that AWS offers to make it really easy to just take advantage of all the benefits of containers within your infrastructure. You could take your existing applications built using whatever technologies you're using inside your organization, and you can really simply run those inside a containerized environment that's completely managed by AWS. And so in this example, we're going to use Fargate, and we're going to use it to implement a small thing called a video thumbnailer. And this is the kind of architecture that you can imagine seeing on a whiteboard inside your office as you're planning out a new feature to develop or inside your organization. And I'll just describe it very simply, and you can follow along in the diagram. In this example, we'll take a file, we'll put it in a video file, we'll put it in a bucket, and when we do, we'll trigger a Lambda, which will handle the event of a new file being uploaded. And that will launch a long-running Fargate task that can run any kind of containerized compute we want. In this case, we'll run a keyframe extraction algorithm. Take the keyframe image that we extracted, we'll drop that in a bucket, and we'll fire off another Lambda to notify us that this is complete. So very simple architecture there, very simple thing to whiteboard when you're architect inside your organization. However, for those who have built things like this, you'll realize that this actually is somewhat complex to actually implement. The common approach to implementing something like this is probably going to be tens of pages of CloudFormation with several different configuration file formats, maybe even some delivery pipelines set up so that I can deliver both my infrastructure and my code separately into this application. And so today, building something like this with AWS, while the building blocks are amazing, it's a little too hard for the breadth of your team to go and easily jump in and take advantage of that. With Pulumi, we really aim to make it easy to build and deploy an architecture using AWS as easily as it is to whiteboard it. So let's take a look at the code. Okay, note here that it's just a couple dozen lines of code. And I can manage my serverless, my containers, and my infrastructure all in one consistent API. So let me just highlight a couple of things in this piece of code. And I won't go into too much detail, but I just want to give you a sense of some of the capabilities that are available here. So first, we have some libraries that give us access to the full capabilities of AWS, this @Pulumi AWS library here. We also have libraries that give us access to higher level capabilities of the AWS platform to make it really easy to use combinations of capabilities of AWS without writing those tens of pages of CloudFormation. We can do things like create and manage AWS S3 buckets, and we can also manage other kinds of storage infrastructure, whether it's RDS databases or DocumentDB or any other kind of managed data store. We can also describe Fargate tasks. Like in this example, we described the FFmpeg thumbnail task with just a couple lines of code. And finally, we can use Fargate with just a couple lines of code here. The last part here, we can stitch together some of our infrastructure using event handlers. So we can say bucket.audObjectCreated, and that will allow us to just hook up a little event handler to the end of one of the functions. And so really simple to add serverless events into my infrastructure. Now, once you've authored your cloud applications, Pulumi also helps your team to deploy and manage them. The Pulumi CLI can be integrated into CI/CD pipelines to continuously deliver your cloud infrastructure applications to users. And the Pulumi console provides rich insights into the resources managed by your Pulumi stack, as well as deep links into the AWS console for access to operational insights via CloudWatch and some of the other capabilities that Trevor mentioned of the underlying platform. Now, as one last example, I just want to also touch on Kubernetes. So when we talk to companies and customers today, we hear a lot of folks talking about migrating towards Kubernetes. Some who are on premises and looking to take a step towards the cloud, and others who are already in the cloud, but looking to harness the rich ecosystem of standards-based Kubernetes API on top of AWS. And Pulumi offers a unique ability to work with both AWS and Kubernetes in a first-class way. And this really enables mixing and matching the best of AWS managed services with the best of Kubernetes APIs. Teams can easily stand up EKS with just a couple of lines of code and then deploy Kubernetes resources or Helm charts on top. Adding a managed database like RDS or DocumentDB is to connect up to your compute in Kubernetes is easy as just a few more lines of code. All right, so just to summarize really quickly, I want to talk about what we offer with Pulumi. So we offer the ability to write code, really software, and get all the software engineering benefits of that, to describe infrastructure and to enable your developers and DevOps teams to collaborate together. And we then allow you to take this and deploy it to AWS and manage it using the Pulumi console. Now, to give you some insight into how customers are benefiting from the combination of AWS and Pulumi, I wanted to introduce Kim Hamilton, the CTO at Learning Machine, an early customer of Pulumi, who have been able to scale their AWS-based cloud development and DevOps on top of Pulumi. Hi, Kim.
Hi, thank you, Luke. I'm Kim Hamilton, the CTO of Learning Machine. About Learning Machine. So Learning Machine is a leader in blockchain-anchored and blockchain-secured digital records. Our customers include universities, governments, and a range of companies and orgs that want to issue natively digital records. Learning Machine's goal is to enable decentralized verification of tamper-evident digital records at scale. These records are recipient-centric by design, meaning that recipients can manage and control the use of their credentials, including educational, occupational, and even government-issued credentials. Learning Machine was based in AWS from the start. Our product and services are backed by AWS Web Services. For issuers, we expose credential and recipient management web UIs. Recipients use the web services to securely exchange their information from their mobile wallet with Learning Machine. And verifiers and other relying parties use our verification services and UIs. We rely heavily on other AWS resources that you see here, SQS, S3, KMS. Originally, we were not using containers. Instead, we deployed our application to designated EC2 instances with custom scripts. So some of the challenges with it, our infrastructure was provisioned with templates and scripts that had expanded over time to about 25,000 lines, and it made it very hard for the engineering team to understand and maintain. In fact, only one person could actually understand and maintain them, and we were relying way too heavily on that one person. At the same time, our requirements were expanding. Through our international customers, we had requirements to deploy our software into customer-controlled AWS accounts. And that might be for a variety of reasons, region, locality, et cetera. But then also on the development side, to improve agility and increase our release cadence, we wanted to enable more fine-grained deployment options. And that's where Pulumi came in. Pulumi offered cloud-native infrastructure as code. So while we already had a system working in AWS, we needed a much simpler way to understand, modify, and deploy the system. An especially appealing aspect was Pulumi's higher level abstractions. And this is shown in some of the examples that Luke showed. For example, you as a development using Pulumi, you focus on building the services and other key elements of the system, but Pulumi will derive the required roles and permissions it takes to get everything wired together. So another really important aspect was the ability Pulumi provides to preview the changes and catch errors even before you deploy. So taking advantage of Pulumi's code and documentation libraries and great support, we were able to simplify the deployment templates and scripts from 25,000 to 500 lines. So that made the resulting code significantly easier to reason about and much more accessible to the developers, so that the whole development team could actually understand and create new services, maintain existing ones. Part of that transition, as I mentioned earlier, we were not using containers initially, but part of this transition, we converted to ECS and to containerize our apps. And on top of that, Pulumi actually made it very easy for us to switch from EC2 launch to Fargate. So that one ended up, we initially did that as an experiment, but that one ended up with some other improvements, which I'll talk about shortly. So again, we had a lot of benefits from this. The first one being reducing the 25,000 lines of custom deployment scripts that we had to manually kind of intervene with to make sure it's correct after deploying, to 500 lines of JavaScript, much more easy to reason about, much more repeatable. We were able to more easily manage our environments and actually more quickly provision our customer instances. So this is in the case of deploying the learning machine application code into a customer AWS instance, specifically because of the fact that the previous scripts that we were using were not quite complete. We would catch some errors and need to tune it, and we would gradually update the scripts, but that whole process and the testing would end up taking weeks before. But then with Pulumi, we got it actually down to under a day, including the testing as well. So that was a significant reduction. The other great thing about that is the ability to stand up test environments for developers who are trying out sort of radically new features, and they don't want to interfere with the rest of everyone's shared environments. The other thing that was surprising, so the switch to Fargate was just a sort of test to see the difference it would make. We weren't really quite sure what we would get out of it, but oh wait, I think I'm on the next slide already. One second. Apologies. Okay, yeah. So the other thing that we noticed is that our AWS bills were cut in half as we rolled the Fargate changes through the various environments. So that was really nice, especially as we were looking to rely on AWS more and more. So yeah, in the end, it was much more simple code to reason about. The environments were easier to manage. It was easier to see, exactly what's going into a release and the impact it would have on the environment. It reduced our customer provisioning time substantially, which was key because international customers were greatly increasing demand for that. And then the cost savings that we got from Fargate, roughly at the time, it was by half, and we're experiencing even more recently. Was a huge unexpected win. So yeah, that's it for me. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me here. And I think we're turning back to Trevor to lead the question and answer session now.
Great, thanks a lot, Kim. So I want to quickly dive into just a couple of things to note before we go into those questions. And I've got quite a few questions that have come through, and I think they're really excellent questions to kind of summarize things. They're valid questions, understanding, what is this big transformation, how we're moving towards more of an abstracted application layer, etc. But something that I've seen is, going through this journey of, old school, where you used to have your own infrastructure, you have, a whole server farm, where it be, back in my day, I had a couple of servers that I used to manage for the small application company. And, it was a really big pain, when we started scaling that to put new servers in place. And this whole change when, I was tasked to start looking at, how do we do this in the cloud? I went through that transformation and I realized, how much faster you move as a company on that application. You now no longer have to have teams sitting there dealing with unnecessary underlying networking issues, or, having to make sure that those, servers are safe and they're running fine. Now, when you start looking at moving into using things, like CloudFormation, you started using things like Elastic Beanstalk, you all of a sudden had the superpower, you're able to develop on your application, focus on that mission critical content that you're working on. And this is what we really started moving towards, in the last 2-3 years. You've seen this whole serverless journey. Now you're no longer actually having to deal with that infrastructure in the cloud, because, once again, we're starting to see that you're getting caught on having to provision, the infrastructure in the cloud, and understanding how do I, there's so many services in the cloud, how do I make sure that I'm doing them optimal? This is when we started looking at serverless. CloudFormation, I'm a, CloudFormation SME in the company. And, I've been from day one working with it. And, we started looking at the serverless model. And this is something that allowed companies to, instead of having to spend a lot of time and putting, building out these templates that have hundreds of resources, now you're seeing companies starting to leverage things like serverless. And this allows them to, with a short bit of code, and that sample slide that Luke showed us just shows you how simple it is to just, with a short couple of lines, be able to provision, architecture and, services on AWS with only a couple of lines of code in Pulumi. And this is something that, from my first time playing with Pulumi, and I'm sure this is a question I'm going to be giving to Kim, is when you have that first time experience, like driving that sports car for the first time, or, actually jump, you can watch a YouTube video of jumping out of a plane 100 times. But that day you jump out the plane is that the real experience, that exhilarating rush of reality that, you're able to move faster. And this is something that I've seen, with the whole serverless movement. And this is something Pulumi has really captured really well, allowing you to no longer sit and be bogged down by that application, the infrastructure code, but being able to actually define this really easily, simply, and be able to focus on that business logic. This allows developers now actually to focus on what your company is responsible for. So you, as a business, obviously have, an application that's serving your customers in whatever possible way. You obviously want to make sure that you're iterating at a rapid rate. You're making sure that those features are really powerful, that, keeping customers, giving them that consistent experience. And you don't want to be bogged down from the, that underlying application architecture. This is something that, Pulumi allows you to define this really quickly. It's something that in your code, you're able to do this. And I think this is something I'm going to ask Luke is like, if I want to start looking at the serverless model using something, like Pulumi to be able to do this. And this is something that I truly believe that you have to experience yourself as a developer. I'm going to hand over to Luke quickly. Luke, can you tell us, my first question to you from the audience there is like, how do we start off with looking at serverless, and how do I start playing with Pulumi? What is the first thing I should be playing around with, just to get an example of, what this really looks like? I like the idea in the beginning of, taking months of architecture and deploying it within a couple of minutes, and hours. How do you see somebody, in their 20 or 15 minutes they have on their side, to be able to play around with new tools and solutions? What do you recommend they get started with Pulumi to really experience that firsthand, that, the power that this tool brings to a DevOps team?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we really want it to be incredibly easy to just get started, feel that experience of having the power to work with all the AWS primitives as quickly as possible. And so we have a free and open source version of Pulumi. All the core of Pulumi is open source and available for anyone to go and grab. You can go to pulumi.io to download the tool chain. You can have that downloaded and run your first application in probably just a couple of minutes. And then after you've run your first application, there's a whole wide variety of examples we have for various other domains you might want to go and check out. And so, for example, if you want to look at something like combining serverless with containers, like I showed in that slide, we have that example. You can copy it down onto your machine and deploy it into your infrastructure, again, in just a few minutes. And so really you can feel the capabilities of the platform. Within less than 10 minutes, you'll have sort of seen what it's like to use this platform and to iterate on an application.
Excellent. Thanks, Luke. I have another question here is, how do you manage the state parameters and variables across different environments using Pulumi?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And one of the things with Pulumi is we because we're using sort of infrastructure as code, infrastructure as software, even in this case, we're able to take that piece of code and deploy it as many different times as we want. So we can deploy, for instance, into a staging environment and a production environment. We can give each of our developers their own development environment where they've got their own copy of that infrastructure. Or we can even do things like have CI/CD deploying continuously into one of these environments. And one of the ways that we enable that is we have a system of configuration for the Pulumi program. And so each of those Pulumi programs, like I showed on the slides, has an external set of parameters provided to them that are the configuration. And those can differ across different environments where that program might get run. And so the configuration used for your staging environment, your production environment, are likely going to be different. They're going to have different access credentials for potentially even different AWS accounts. They're going to have access to different keys for accessing other secrets inside your environment. And so generally, you can use Pulumi's config system to manage the differences you might have between your environments in a really rich way. And that's a very simple thing to do with Pulumi. There's good documentation on that again at pulumi.io.
Great, thanks, Luke. I have a question for Kim here. So, Kim, in this world of, there's so many different tools out there, and how do you know which tools to select and, which ones serve your business correctly, making sure that you're putting, this time and effort, you're putting tools in front of your team. What were the things that you guys kind of weighed up in the beginning? What, options did you look at, and what was the real thing that kicked you off saying, hey, look, Pulumi is the tool we really want to use to start driving this going forward? Given, AWS has solutions, we have a lot of partner solutions, you have, solutions that are multi-cloud. What really, took you to that point where, like, as a team, you decided, let's go with this?
So for us at the time, it had largely to do with the expertise of the engineers that we had. So as I mentioned, we had exactly one person who felt really comfortable with CloudFormation. The rest of us, we were looking at either hiring an additional person or having to do a lot of ramp up to understand, the huge amount of code that we had there. The main thing about Pulumi was the idea that to us, it was really simple to grasp the concepts. We were confident that anyone could understand what was going on, but then also the idea of what we saw as improved ability to reason about it and preview and catch errors before we deploy. So those were huge, and I think their documentation, samples, all of that made it really easy to get started. Their support, whenever we had any concerns, they were very helpful with getting us through it. So it was the conversion was really nice and fast, and it's been great that we've been benefiting from it ever since. Like being able to add new services before, I think it would be a very long process and a lot of discussions to even get started in that. Whereas now, developers can directly just provision their own services. So that part is a huge win. Yeah.
Excellent. Luke, I have a question here for you. So obviously, Pulumi, you mentioned that there's the open source aspect, and you obviously, want to see this obviously evolving to ensure that your customers are having the best experience possible. Where can people get in contact with you guys or provide any feedback, or, if there's any, companies that are interested in this, but there's particular challenges that they're facing, or if there's features that they're looking at including, or, where would you recommend they go? Where should they put in that information? Where do those questions, where's the best place to get in contact with you, etc.?
Absolutely, yeah. So, Pulumi.com, you can go, you can see information about the portfolio of kind of products and offerings, and there's a contact us form there where you can send any questions to us, and we'll get back to you immediately to give you guidance on how to best apply Pulumi into your applications. We also have a community Slack channel for folks who are getting started with Pulumi and want just that real-time feedback and to be able to ask questions of the community of Pulumi users. It's very active, very good place to get questions answered, both from the Pulumi team and from the Pulumi community generally. And that link's available from Pulumi.com and Pulumi.io.
Great. I have one other question. I think maybe this is something that they can actually go and check themselves. But underneath Pulumi, what are the components that you're looking at? For example, first one is, what is the future roadmap around like programming languages that you support? And then secondly, how much functionality does the user have under the hood to be able to manipulate or change anything that's happening there?
Yeah, those are great questions. So in terms of languages, we are expanding out the language portfolio over time. We plan to support many more languages over time. Right now, one of the key things I should mention is that the choice of language is really just about the way that you write the deployment of your application. So it doesn't constrain what kinds of applications you can deploy into your infrastructure. If you have Java applications or .NET applications, you can still deploy those on top of your infrastructure just like you always could. What we're really enabling with Pulumi is a replacement for JSON and HCL and YAML and these sorts of formats that are often used for configuration languages. But right now we support JavaScript, Python, and Go. We have some prototype.NET support that's being built in the open source community. We expect that language portfolio to expand over time. On the second question, I think was about how much ability do you have to reach in and really grab the details. If the abstraction that you see doesn't provide all the features you want, how can you kind of modify those? We have a bunch of tools to make that really easy. One is that you can go and all this stuff is open source. So you can go and take that component and change it and maybe send a feature request upstream to the component author. And so it's really easy to expose those capabilities, expose those flags as options on these components. But then we also have the ability to sort of reach in behind the scenes and attach additional things onto resources. And so we think a lot about how to make it really easy to both get the simplicity of these higher level models, but also provide the flexibility to do whatever you want with the platform. And so really, I'd say that combination of improved productivity from the simplicity plus the full flexibility of the platform, that's really the thing we're trying to enable with Pulumi.
Excellent. Thanks, Luke. So yeah, guys, there has been quite a storm of questions. A lot of these, I think, are also in the context of potentially issues or discussions that I would love for us to actually follow up by email. These are things that we really want to work with you. I know Pulumi and their team, they really want to make sure that you guys get the best experience possible when using their tools. I highly recommend checking out that Slack channel. That community is really active. You can see what people are doing. This is something that you can really, be exposed to day by day, how people are using these tools. And if you have any other questions about, how you're dealing with, Pulumi interacting with AWS services, if your company is looking at going through any transformation and you're weighing up those pros and cons of how to do that, and you essentially just need some whiteboarding and those things, please feel free to reach out. There's a lot of resources out there. It can be quite intimidating for those that are new. For those that are, obviously experienced and you're just kind of looking at, what's Pulumi, what's this tool? Look, yeah, there's no better way to play. From day one, I've been delivering training internally, working with customers and partners. There's no better way for you to experience and getting hands-on actual work with these tools. So go and check out their open source, repository. Go and check to see their content and documentation on their website. Give that quick start so that, that little try me solution yourself a try. And if you have any questions or any feedback, please send that over. That will be really appreciated. So to wrap things up, as we mentioned, this will be available 2 to 3 days after this presentation. You should get an email from this recording. Should be made available to you guys. If you guys are not all able to stick around, or if there's any things that you wanted to go over again. And then, as we said, any of the questions we didn't answer, we'll obviously respond to those via email. So thanks a lot for taking the time to join us today, guys. We really hope that you found some informative information. If you have any follow-up questions that do come to mind, or anything that you want to go back to the team and talk about, please feel free to reach out. We want to make sure that you guys are selecting the right tools, that if you're facing any problems, we're there to help you to ensure that you are experiencing it the best way possible. And I hope you guys are keeping warm wherever you are, and I hope you have a fantastic day further. Bye for now.